A millionaire is saved from a car accident by two homeless girls, but when he takes them into his home, he is surprised to find that the younger sister knows how to use expensive household appliances. The downpour pounded the windshield in an erratic rhythm, a chaotic beat against the glass. Ethan White gripped the steering wheel with one hand while the other flicked through emails on his phone. The headlights of his luxury sedan barely cut through the sheets of rain cascading from the sky. Houston's streets, already dimly lit, shimmered with slick puddles reflecting the broken glow of the streetlights. "Mr. White, your meeting with Oaktree Capital is set for Thursday." A voice crackled through the car's Bluetooth. "Move it to Wednesday," Ethan said curtly, his gaze darting between the road and his phone. The curve in the street came faster than expected. His tires lost grip, skidding helplessly across the flooded pavement. The crash wasn't deafening, but the impact rattled through the car like a body blow. His head snapped forward, the seatbelt the only thing keeping him from slamming into the dashboard, while his phone tumbled onto the floor. The car's hood crumpled against a street lamp, steam hissing as rain collided with hot metal. Across the street, Claire hunched in the shadows of a crumbling alleyway, her thin arms buried deep in a trash can. She flinched as the jagged rim of a can sliced her palm. "Almost got it," she muttered, pulling out a stale, plastic-wrapped piece of bread. Nearby, Emily curled up under an overhang, drowning in an oversized sweatshirt. "Claire," she whispered, voice barely above the rain. "What was that?" Claire turned, squinting through the downpour. "Stay here," she said, already stepping out. Her bare feet slapped against the puddles as she darted toward the noise. The dim glow of headlights illuminated the mangled wreckage of a car. "Wait!" Emily's tiny legs struggled to keep up, but Claire didn't slow down. They reached the vehicle, the rain making it nearly impossible to see through the shattered glass. Ethan sat slumped in the driver's seat, his head at an unnatural angle. Steam curled from the crumpled hood like ghostly tendrils. Claire banged on the window. "Hey, can you hear me?" A groan answered. His hand moved toward the door handle, but his fingers slipped, too weak to grasp it. "We have to help him." Emily clutched Claire's arm, her wide eyes catching the pale glow of the street lamp. Claire's jaw clenched. "Help me pull the door." Together, they yanked with all their strength, but the door wouldn't budge. Rain streamed down Claire's face, her soaked hair plastered to her skin as she scanned the area. "Stay back." She grabbed a loose brick from the sidewalk and swung. The window shattered, glass spilling onto the seats. Ethan flinched. His bloodied face turned toward them, eyes heavy, unfocused. "Come on." Claire reached inside, fumbling with the seatbelt. It released with a click, and she leaned back. "Emily, help me pull him out." Emily hesitated, hands hovering, then grabbed Ethan's wrist with more strength than expected. Together, they dragged him from the wreckage. His weight sagged between them, his tailored suit soaked through, streaked with blood and grime. Whatever power he carried in his presence was gone, leaving only a fragile, broken man. Ethan's lips moved, but the words barely came. "What?" Claire said flatly. "You crashed." She shifted his weight, steadying him. "We're getting you help." A car passed slowly, headlights catching the three of them like a frozen snapshot in time. But it kept moving, taillights swallowed by the night. "There's a clinic down the block," Claire murmured, more to herself than Emily. "We'll get him there." "Is he going to be all right?" Emily's voice quivered as she gazed at Ethan's pale, slack face. Claire's grip on his arm tightened. "He doesn't have much of a choice." The clinic's waiting room smelled of antiseptic and damp fabric. Claire and Emily sat on a cracked vinyl bench, their drenched clothes clinging to them. The soft hum of a vending machine filled the silence as they waited. Emily rested her head against Claire's shoulder, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. "Do you think he's mad at us?" she murmured. Claire brushed a damp strand of hair from her sister's face. "He'd be angrier if we hadn't done anything." As the clinic door groaned open, a nurse stepped out, clipboard in hand. She looked at the two soaked figures huddled on the bench. "He's stable," she said gently. "Are you girls all right?" Claire exchanged a glance with Emily before answering. "We're fine." But as she leaned back, Her eyes lingered on the closed door behind the nurse. She couldn't quite explain it, but something about saving that man felt like the start of something they couldn't just walk away from. The sharp scent of disinfectant and distant murmurs pulled Ethan White back to awareness. His head ached, a dull throbbing radiating from his temple. Blinking against the harsh fluorescent light above, he became aware of the rough hospital sheets and the stiff pillow pressing against his neck. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of a monitor. Ethan shifted slightly, wincing as his body protested. His mind scrambled to piece together fragments of memory: the rain, the crash, the loss of control as the car spun out of his grasp. The rest was a blur, but there was something else. Voices. He turned toward the narrow window by the door. Beyond it, two small figures sat huddled on a bench. A girl, no older than 12, leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly, her head tipped back in exhaustion. Beside her, a younger child curled up with her knees tucked to her chest, gripping the oversized sweatshirt draped over her frame. Both were drenched, their wet clothes clinging to their slender bodies, their pale faces illuminated by the sterile hallway lights. Ethan kept his gaze on the older girl. Even from across the room, her eyes held a sharpness, a wary calculation that didn't belong to a child. She turned slightly, catching his glance before quickly looking away, pulling the younger girl closer, as if shielding her. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Good to see you awake, Mr. White," she said briskly, glancing at the monitors. "You had a rough night. Lucky someone got to you when they did." "Those girls," Ethan rasped, his throat dry from disuse. The nurse followed his gaze and offered a faint smile. "They brought you in, said they saw the crash and didn't hesitate to help." She hesitated, her tone softening. "I think they've been here ever since." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Waiting for him. They don't have anyone else," the nurse added, as if sensing his unspoken question. "No family listed. Just out there on their own." Ethan pushed himself upright, ignoring the sharp protest from his ribs. The nurse reached to steady him, but he waved her off. "Bring them in," he said, his voice firm again. A moment later, the door creaked open, and the two girls hesitated in the doorway. The older one lingered near the threshold, her shoulders squared despite the shivers running through her. The younger girl clung to her side, peeking out with wide, uncertain eyes. Ethan studied them in silence, unsure how to begin. He wasn't accustomed to this. Conversations filled with gratitude or personal connections. His life was structured around deals, contracts, and carefully measured words. "You brought me here," he finally said, his tone making it more of a statement than a question. The older girl gave a firm nod, her jaw set with defiance. "You were in trouble. Someone had to." Ethan's lips barely twitched, almost imperceptibly. There was an edge to her voice, an unwillingness to let kindness be mistaken for weakness. The younger one stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "Are you okay now?" Ethan blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "I'll be fine," he answered after a brief pause. "Good." The younger girl's faint smile carried unspoken relief, evident in the way her grip on her sister's sleeve relaxed. Ethan turned his gaze back to the older one. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Claire." "And hers?" "Emily." Leaning back slightly, Ethan felt the tension in his posture ease just a fraction. "Claire." "Emily. You could have walked away. Why didn't you?" Claire lifted her chin. "Because you needed help." Once again, simple and direct, no embellishment. Silence stretched between them, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan found himself unsettled by it. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Where are you staying?" Claire's expression turned guarded. "We're fine." Ethan arched an eyebrow. "You don't look fine. It's pouring out there." He gestured toward the window. Rain streamed down the glass in erratic patterns. "You can't go back wherever you came from. Stay at my place tonight, just until the storm passes." Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. "No thanks." "You're not." Ethan counted silently before his voice sharpened. "Look at her." He motioned toward Emily, who was visibly shivering despite her efforts to appear composed. She was soaked through, probably starving. "You're really going to leave her out in this?" Guilt flickered across Claire's face. Her jaw tightened as she averted her gaze. "We'll be okay." The tension in the room was thick, but before Claire could argue further, Emily tugged at her sleeve. "It's okay," she murmured. "Maybe he can help." Claire's lips thinned, her eyes narrowing as she studied Ethan, as if trying to figure out his motives. "Look," Ethan said, his tone more deliberate now. "I'm not offering charity. You helped me when you didn't have to. Let me return the favor. One night, a roof over your head, no strings." The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, Claire gave a barely perceptible nod. Ethan exhaled, only then realizing he had been holding his breath. "Fine. I'll have my driver take us back." As the girls followed the nurse out to collect their few belongings, Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the closed door. For the first time in years, the rigid predictability of his life felt disrupted. And as much as he disliked the thought, he wasn't sure he wanted things to go back to the way they were. By the time Ethan's sleek black car pulled up to the gates of his estate, the rain had calmed to a light drizzle. The towering iron gates groaned open, revealing a long, winding driveway lined with meticulously trimmed hedges. Beyond them, the mansion's warm, golden lights glowed softly, casting a quiet invitation into a world far removed from the storm's chaos. Claire sat stiffly in the back seat, arms locked tightly over her chest. Every jolt in the road deepened the crease in her forehead. Next to her, Emily pressed herself forward, her small face nearly glued to the window, eyes wide as she drank in the sight before her. "Is that a fountain?" Emily whispered, pointing at the marble structure in the middle of the circular driveway. Water cascaded gracefully from a cherub's outstretched hands. "It's just a fountain," Claire muttered, yanking Emily back into her seat. Ethan flicked a glance at them through the rearview mirror, but said nothing. The car rolled to a smooth stop at the entrance, where a butler swung the door open with effortless precision. His brow arched slightly at the girl's unkempt appearance, but he wisely kept his thoughts to himself. "Come on," Ethan said as he stepped out, his tone brisk but not unkind. Inside, the mansion seemed to stretch on forever. The marble floors gleamed beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, and the faint scent of polished wood lingered in the air. Emily's steps faltered as she took in the soaring ceilings and grand staircase. Claire, on the other hand, stuck close to her, her sharp gaze flicking around as though expecting a trap. "It's too clean," she muttered under her breath. "Do you live here alone?" Emily asked, her voice carrying softly through the vast space. "Yes," Ethan replied, shrugging off his jacket and handing it to the butler. "Just me." Emily frowned. "No family?" Ethan hesitated, just for a second. "No. Must get lonely," Emily murmured. Claire shot her a sharp look, but Ethan's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile, an expression so unfamiliar it almost caught him off guard. "Not something I think about," he said, leading them into a smaller, cozier room just off the main hall. The sitting room was no less extravagant, with deep leather couches and a fire crackling in the hearth. A maid appeared with towels, which Ethan handed over with little ceremony. "Dry off. I'll have something brought in for you to eat," he said. Emily wrapped herself in a towel, sighing as the warmth seeped in. "This place feels like something out of a movie," she murmured, her wide eyes tracing the intricate wallpaper. "It's just a house," Claire said flatly, though her hand instinctively rested on Emily's shoulder, anchoring her. Ethan lingered by the door, studying the stark contrast between the two. Emily's wonder was open, untouched by doubt, while Claire's every movement carried the weight of distrust. She tensed when the maid returned with steaming bowls of soup, as if the simple gesture of kindness concealed something more. "You'll sleep upstairs," Ethan said, his tone neutral but firm. "Separate rooms, if you prefer." "No," Claire shot back instantly. "We stay together." Ethan didn't argue, just nodded. "Fine. The guest room's big enough." Emily beamed up at Claire, tugging her sleeve. "See? It's okay." Claire didn't respond, her gaze locked on Ethan, watching, waiting. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch in hand. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind an eerie quiet. His eyes drifted toward the window, where the faint outline of the fountain stood in the moonlight. His mind replayed the evening, Emily's small hands clutching the towel, her eyes shining at the sight of the fire. Then Claire, rigid, guarded, every word measured. Ethan wasn't one for sentiment, but something about these two unsettled him. Not in a way he disliked, just in a way he couldn't quite define. They were strangers, yet their presence in his home didn't feel like an intrusion. If anything, it filled a space he hadn't even realized was empty. The soft shuffle of footsteps nudged him out of his thoughts. Glancing toward the hallway, he spotted Emily creeping toward the kitchen. "What are you doing up?" he asked, keeping his voice quiet. Emily froze before turning with a sheepish look. "I was thirsty." Ethan motioned toward the kitchen. "Go ahead, help yourself." She hesitated briefly, then slipped inside. Ethan followed, leaning against the doorframe as she rummaged for a glass. Without missing a beat, Emily reached for the cabinet closest to the sink, pulling out exactly what she needed. "You seem to know your way around," Ethan commented casually. Emily paused, the glass hovering just before the faucet. "Just a guess," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. Ethan didn't respond, but the way she averted his gaze lingered in his mind long after she had gone back to bed. Sitting alone in his study, Ethan stared at his empty glass. The girls were more than they let on, and for the first time in years, he found himself drawn to a mystery that had nothing to do with profit margins. Morning arrived with golden sunlight spilling through the towering windows of Ethan's estate, stretching long shadows over the cool marble floors. The house was too quiet for his liking, making every little sound, footsteps, muffled voices, the low hum of the coffee machine, feel amplified. In the kitchen, Ethan leaned against the granite counter, his gaze locked on Emily. She stood on her toes, effortlessly working the sleek espresso machine, one that was rarely touched. Her small hands moved with practiced precision, pressing buttons and twisting knobs as if she'd done it countless times before. "You're good at that," Ethan remarked lightly, though his curiosity sharpened. Emily glanced up, her eyes flicking to him quickly, almost nervously. "I just watched you do it yesterday," she said. Despite the casual words, a flicker of hesitation broke through the confidence she tried to project. "Watched me?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I don't even know how to work that thing without reading the manual." Emily shrugged, keeping her gaze down. "It's not that hard." She slid a steaming cup toward him before retreating to the kitchen table. Claire sat nearby, chewing on her toast, with the enthusiasm of someone forced to eat cardboard. She caught the exchange, her sharp eyes darting between Ethan and Emily. "She's just good with machines," Claire said, her tone edged with quiet defensiveness, as if shutting down further questions before they could be asked. Ethan took a sip of the coffee, letting the silence settle. "Is that right?" "Yeah," Claire answered firmly. She nudged her plate away, leaning back with her arms crossed. "She's smart. Figures things out fast." Emily kept her gaze down, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Not that smart," she muttered. Ethan set his cup down with a soft clink, eyes never leaving the two girls. "Where'd you learn?" His question was aimed at Emily, but meant for both of them. Emily hesitated, shoulders tensing under the weight of the question. "I just picked things up," she answered vaguely. "Used to be around people who had stuff like this." "Stuff like this," Ethan repeated, his voice steady but probing. Emily's hands stilled. She shot a glance at Claire, a silent plea flashing between them. Claire straightened, her expression hardening. "We don't talk about that," Claire said flatly, her voice final like a door slamming shut. "We're here now. That's all that matters." Ethan leaned against the counter, his gaze shifting between them. There was something subtle yet unmistakable in the way Claire nudged her chair closer to Emily, as if she could physically block any unwanted questions. "I just want to understand," Ethan said, his voice gentler now. Claire's expression tightened. "Understand what?" that we don't have anywhere to go, that we're just trying to make it through the day. You think having a big house and fancy coffee machines means you can fix everything." Her words hung heavy, and for a moment, Ethan didn't respond. It wasn't her frustration that struck him, but the raw fear beneath it, the kind that came from too many days of uncertainty about what tomorrow might bring. "I'm not trying to fix anything," Ethan finally said. "But you can't expect me not to ask questions when you both know things most kids your age wouldn't." Emily's voice was barely audible, almost swallowed by the space around them. "We're not trying to cause problems." Claire's hand brushed over Emily's, a quiet reassurance. "We don't have to tell you everything," she said, her tone more measured now, less defensive. Ethan studied her before giving a slow nod. "Fair enough," he said. "But if you ever need something, food, clothes, anything, you just ask." Neither of them replied, but Claire's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. The morning passed in near silence. Ethan retreated to his study, though his mind kept drifting back to the kitchen, to Emily's quick hands and the fleeting look of worry in her eyes. There was a story there, one she wasn't ready to tell. From his desk, he caught the faint sound of voices coming from the sitting room. He stood, walking toward the doorway, careful not to intrude. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through an oversized book from his shelves, her face alight with curiosity. Claire was nearby, angled toward the door, poised as if she expected trouble at any moment. Ethan lingered in the shadows, observing them. The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but he had time. For now, he would let them settle, allow the vast house to feel less imposing, let trust find its way in. And when they were ready, he would be there to listen. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall sitting room windows, casting warm patterns across the polished wooden floor. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of a vacuum or the faint rustle of turning pages. Emily sat on the large rug, a thick book resting in her lap. Her legs were crossed, her small frame hunched forward as she traced her finger along the words, her lips moving soundlessly. Claire perched on the arm of a leather chair, her eyes fixed on the doorway, her foot tapping lightly against the chair's side as though bracing for something to break the fragile calm. Ethan stepped into the doorway, his footsteps intentionally soft. He leaned against the frame, taking in the contrast between the two girls. Emily engrossed in curiosity, Claire wound tight with vigilance. "You like reading, Emily?" he asked, breaking the quiet. Emily's head lifted, startled but not afraid. She gave a small nod. "Mama taught me. She said books were magic." Her voice held a wistful note as her eyes flicked back to the page. Claire's foot stilled, and she shot Ethan a wary glance. "Is this another round of questions?" she asked, her tone edged with exhaustion. Ethan let the remark slide and took a seat on the couch across from them. "No questions," he said simply, though his gaze lingered on Emily. Emily hesitated, her finger pausing mid-sentence. She glanced at Claire for reassurance, then back at Ethan. "Mama used to read to me," she whispered. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "What did she like to read?" "Fairy tales," Emily answered, a faint smile appearing. "She said they made the world feel less heavy." Her voice faded, and she closed the book gently, holding it close to her chest. Claire shifted, uncomfortable, her fingers drumming against the chair's arm. "Emily, it's okay." Emily's voice was quiet but firm. "It's just memories." Ethan didn't speak, letting the moment unfold. Emily lowered her gaze to the rug, her fingers absently brushing the book's cover. "We lived in a big house," she said slowly, as if pulling each word from a distant place. "It had tall windows, kind of like this one. Mama worked a lot. She always said we had to, or..." Her voice wavered, then she shook her head. "She just worked a lot." Ethan felt a pang of something heavy in his chest at the resignation in her tone. "What about after?" he asked softly. Emily's hands went still, and she bit her lip. "After Mama got sick, everything changed," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "There were people. They weren't kind. They didn't want me around. They told me I didn't belong." The room grew tense. Claire's jaw tightened as she shifted closer to Emily, wrapping an arm around her. "That's enough," she said firmly, shooting a sharp look at Ethan, as if daring him to press further. "I'm not trying to upset her," Ethan responded, his voice even but calm. "You don't understand," Claire snapped. "Bringing it up doesn't help. It only makes things worse." Emily shook her head, her small fingers gripping the book tighter. "It's okay, Claire," she murmured. She turned to Ethan, her eyes wide but steady. "Mama told me to be brave, even when it's hard." Ethan gave a small nod, his expression softening. "Your mother must have been a strong woman." For a moment, pride flickered through Emily's sadness, lighting up her face. "She was the best. She always made me feel safe, even when—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away. Ethan leaned back, giving her space. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," he assured her. Emily nodded, her shoulders easing slightly. "Thank you," she said softly. The silence that followed carried weight, but it wasn't uneasy. Claire held Emily close, her protective instincts unwavering, her thoughts unspoken. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan moved toward the window, his gaze drifting over the vast lawn beyond. The image of Emily clutching that book, her voice shaking as she spoke of a past that had been anything but kind, stuck with him. For the first time in years, something stirred in him, a need to protect, to shield. It was a feeling he hadn't let himself acknowledge in a long time, but now he couldn't ignore it. Turning back to the room, he watched the two girls settle into the quiet, their bond as unbreakable as steel. Whatever had led them here, Ethan realized, they weren't just a puzzle to figure out, they were a responsibility. And for once, he didn't feel the impulse to walk away. Leave a comment, coffee, if you find this story worth listening to. The crisp afternoon air carried a trace of warmth, the sun casting a golden glow over Ethan's vast estate. Emily dashed through the garden, her laughter drifting faintly through the open windows of the mansion. She twirled in the dappled sunlight, her small hands outstretched as if trying to catch the light itself. It was rare to see a moment where the weight of her past seemed to vanish, leaving only a carefree child. Ethan stood at the study window, arms crossed, watching. A slight smile threatened to tug at the corners of his mouth. Claire, ever watchful, sat nearby on the garden steps, her gaze never straying far from Emily. The sound of a car pulling up the driveway broke the peace. Ethan glanced at the clock, then stepped away from the window. Moments later, he greeted his guest in the grand foyer. Jonathan Bryant entered, his tailored suit immaculate, his polished demeanor exuding the well-practiced charm of a seasoned businessman. His handshake was firm, his smile all surface. "Mr. White," Jonathan said smoothly. "Lovely place you've got here. Makes a man envious." Ethan gestured toward the sitting room. "Let's get this over with," he said flatly. As they settled into their chairs, Ethan caught Jonathan's gaze drifting toward the open windows. Something outside had caught his attention. Ethan followed his gaze and spotted Emily weaving through rows of blooming roses. "She's energetic," Jonathan commented offhandedly, though there was an edge to his tone. Ethan tensed, his eyes narrowing. "Just a couple of kids staying here for a bit." Jonathan's smile flickered, a calculated expression settling in. "How generous of you." Ethan ignored the remark, steering the conversation back to business. For the next half hour, they discussed numbers and projections, but Jonathan's attention kept drifting. His eyes flicked toward the garden more often than Ethan was comfortable with. When the meeting wrapped up, Ethan walked Jonathan to the door, a gnawing unease settling in his gut. As the car disappeared down the driveway, he returned to his study, the feeling that something had been left unsaid still nagging at him. Outside, Emily crouched near the garden fountain, her fingers trailing across the cool marble. The sudden sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze. She turned and saw a tall figure towering over her. "Hello, Emily," Jonathan greeted, his voice smooth and deliberate. Emily's stomach twisted into knots. She scrambled to her feet, backing away. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. Jonathan stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. "I could ask you the same thing," he replied, his smile razor-sharp. "Didn't I make myself clear? You're not supposed to be seen. And yet, here you are, acting like you belong." "I haven't done anything," Emily stammered, gripping the hem of her dress. Jonathan's smile faded, replaced by a cold, steely glare. "Listen to me carefully," he hissed. "You stay quiet. You don't tell anyone who I am or what I've done for you. Understand?" Emily nodded quickly, her heartbeat pounding so hard she feared he might hear it. Jonathan crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. "Good, because if you don't, things will get complicated, and neither of us wants that." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Straightening, Jonathan turned and walked away without another glance, leaving Emily frozen in place. When she returned to the house, her face was pale, her steps slow and hesitant. Claire noticed immediately, rising from the couch. "What happened?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Nothing," Emily mumbled, avoiding her sister's gaze. She moved toward the staircase, her small frame seeming to shrink under the weight of an invisible burden. Claire followed gently, grabbing her arm. "Emily, tell me." "I'm fine," Emily insisted, pulling away. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I just need to lie down." Ethan, watching from the hallway, stepped forward. "Emily, is something wrong?" Emily flinched at his voice, but didn't turn around. "No," she said, her tone flat and distant. Without another word, she disappeared up the stairs. Ethan exchanged a look with Claire, his brow furrowed. "She's never that quiet," he said softly. Claire folded her arms, her posture defensive. "She doesn't talk about things if she doesn't want to. She'll tell me when she's ready." "Maybe," Ethan murmured, though doubt clung to his voice. The silence that followed was uneasy, thick with questions neither of them dared to ask. Emily sat stiffly on the edge of the guest room bed, her fingers trembling as she fixated on the floor. She had stood strong before, but the shadow of Jonathan felt too immense to outrun. Downstairs, late morning light filtered into Ethan's study, reflecting off the polished wood of his desk. His coffee sat untouched, forgotten as he stared blankly at the open ledger. His mind kept circling back to Emily the way she had withdrawn, the haunted look in her eyes. It gnawed at him, an uneasy weight he couldn't ignore. A distant knock echoed through the quiet house. Ethan frowned, glancing at the clock. No one was expected. He rose, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet as he made his way to the foyer. Claire was already at the door, standing slightly ahead of Emily, as if shielding her from whoever was on the other side. Ethan took note of her rigid stance, the way her small frame seemed to grow with defiance. The butler pulled the door open, revealing a tall man who stepped inside. His rugged appearance, broad shoulders, a weathered face, a military duffel slung over his arm, made him seem out of place in the refined entryway. "Daniel." Emily's voice broke the silence. Her eyes widened with recognition, and before anyone could react, she rushed forward. The man dropped his bag and caught her in a fierce embrace. "Emily," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "It's really you." Ethan exchanged a look with Claire, who, despite the wariness in her gaze, seemed to soften ever so slightly. "Who is he?" Claire asked, her voice measured. Daniel knelt to Emily's level, gently brushing away a tear from her cheek. "I'm her uncle," he said steadily, his voice kind. "My name's Daniel. Helen was my sister." Claire's gaze flickered between Emily and Daniel before settling on Ethan. "Is he telling the truth?" Ethan raised a hand, his brow furrowed in thought. "Let's take this to the sitting room," he suggested. Inside, Emily stayed close to Daniel, her small fingers gripping his sleeve tightly, as if afraid to let go. From his chair, Ethan studied them, noting how naturally Daniel seemed to put her at ease. "I've been looking for her for months," Daniel said, his voice edged with both frustration and relief. "After Helen died, I tried to track down Emily, but her father wasn't exactly cooperative." Ethan's jaw tightened at the mention of Jonathan. "Her father never struck me as the nurturing kind." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's putting it lightly." Emily shifted uncomfortably, her gaze falling. Daniel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he assured her. "You don't have to carry it all alone." The room fell into a hush. Claire perched on the edge of the couch, her hands tightly clasped, while Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Emily's voice, small and hesitant, broke the silence. "Mama was sick," she said. "She tried to hide it, but I knew." Her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress. When she was gone, I thought I'd be okay because I still had him. My father, Jonathan Bryant." "Jonathan," Ethan echoed, piecing it together. Emily nodded, her eyes shimmering. "But he didn't want me." "Not really. He let me stay, but only because Mama begged him to before she left." Her voice cracked, and she inhaled a shaky breath. There were others in the house. Emily hesitated, her voice faltering. "Catherine and Carlos. They hated me. Catherine said I didn't belong, and Carlos," she swallowed hard, her shoulders quivering. "What did Carlos do?" Ethan asked, his tone unusually soft. He'd shove me, call me names. Once, he locked me in the pantry because I spilled juice on his shoes." She hugged herself, as if trying to disappear. "And Jonathan didn't care. He said I should learn to be careful." The weight of her words settled over the room, thick and suffocating. Daniel's grip on Emily's shoulder tightened. "You should have never been there to begin with," he said, his tone firm but tinged with regret. "I'm so sorry, Emily." Ethan shot to his feet, pacing toward the window as he stared out at the garden. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "And he still has the nerve to threaten her," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Clear stepped closer to Emily, her usual sharp edge softened by quiet empathy. "You don't have to go back," she told her. "Not ever." Emily lifted her gaze to the woman who felt like a sister, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear clouding her eyes. "You'll stay here as long as you need," Ethan added, his voice steady. He turned to Daniel. "If you want her to come with you eventually, that's up to her. But for now, she's staying far away from him." Daniel held Ethan's stare for a long moment before nodding. "I'll trust you with her for now, but I'm not leaving Houston. Not until I know she's safe." Ethan's lips curved slightly. "You'll find that's something I take very seriously." Emily glanced between the two men, her grip on Daniel's sleeve easing just a little. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of her past seemed to lift, if only slightly. Ethan adjusted his tie as he strode into the conference room, his face composed, though his mind raced with thoughts. The spacious room, with its sleek glass table and panoramic city view, was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. At the far end sat Jonathan Bryant, exuding his usual air of controlled arrogance. "White," Jonathan greeted, rising and offering his hand. His polished smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan ignored the gesture and let a folder land on the table with a dull thud. "Let's get straight to the point." Jonathan's smile faltered as he settled back into his chair. "Straight to business? Works for me." Ethan's jaw tightened as he remained standing, looming over the table. "This isn't about business, Jonathan. This is about Emily." For a brief second, surprise flickered in Jonathan's eyes before indifference masked it. "Emily? I don't see what she has to do with you." Ethan's tone sharpened. "She matters to me because she's under my roof now. And I know what she's been through." He leaned forward, planting his hands on the table. "Your daughter. Your responsibility. Or at least, she should have been." Jonathan's expression darkened, the cracks in his composed facade beginning to show. "I don't know what she's been telling you, but I gave her everything she needed. A home. Food. That's more than most would bother to do." Ethan let out a cold, humorless laugh. "You call that parenting? Letting her suffer in her own home while you look the other way? She's a kid, Jonathan. Your kid." Jonathan's lips pressed into a thin line. "You have no idea what it takes to manage a family and a legacy like mine. I did what I could. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't nothing." Ethan cut in, his voice razor sharp. "You failed her in every way that mattered. And now you have the audacity to threaten her." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "She doesn't know how to stay in her place. She's always been difficult. I did what I had to." Ethan straightened, his voice as cold and unyielding as steel. "No, what you did was abandon her. And that ends now. Effective immediately, I'm cutting all ties with you and your company." Jonathan's control shattered. "What?" he snapped, pushing up from his chair. "You can't be serious. Do you even realize what you're throwing away?" "I know exactly what I'm walking away from," Ethan replied evenly, gathering his documents. "I won't stand by while you keep hurting her. If cutting ties with you is what it takes to keep her safe, then that's what I'll do." Jonathan's hands curled into fists, his voice turning into a dangerous whisper. "You think you're some kind of hero. You're just a businessman, White. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." Ethan held his gaze, unfazed. "I know enough to see exactly what kind of man you are, and I want nothing to do with you." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out, his footsteps ringing in the tense silence. Back at the mansion, Claire sat cross-legged on the floor of the guest room, a book open in her lap. Emily was next to her, quiet but at ease, her head resting against Claire's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, you know," Claire said suddenly, her voice steady but gentle. Emily tilted her head, glancing up. "I know," she murmured. Claire shut the book, turning fully toward her. "I mean it, Emily. No matter what happens, we're in this together." Emily's lips curved into a small smile, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Thanks, Claire." Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hall before he appeared in the doorway. His tie was loosened, his expression worn but determined. "How are you both holding up?" "Fine," Claire answered quickly, though her eyes studied him carefully. "What happened?" Ethan leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "I cut ties with him," he said simply. Emily sat up straighter, her eyes wide. "With my father?" "Yes," Ethan said, meeting her gaze. "He won't come near you again, Emily. Not while you're here." A quiet pause filled the room before Emily stood, closing the space between them. She wrapped her small arms around Ethan's waist, holding on tightly. Ethan stiffened, caught off guard by the sudden gesture. Slowly, he placed a hand on her back, his touch steady but careful. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. Claire watched, the sharp edges of her expression softening. She stood and stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on Emily's shoulder. For the first time in a long while, the mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Ethan looked down at the two girls, a quiet sense of responsibility settling over him. They were his to protect now, and he wouldn't let them down. The news sent shockwaves through the city's business circles. Ethan White severing ties with Bryant Enterprises wasn't just a standard corporate maneuver, it was a tectonic shift that sent ripples across the financial world. Other partners, who had long been wary of Jonathan Bryant's practices, but too cautious to challenge him, suddenly had reason to start looking closer. At first, the whispers were subtle. Unexplained inconsistencies in financial reports, questionable deals, the kind of red flags that only seemed more damning when someone as high-profile as Ethan White walked away. By the end of the week, those whispers had turned into an all-out storm. Reporters camped outside Bryant's offices, cameras flashing every time he stepped out, his carefully curated image beginning to fracture under the relentless scrutiny. Regulators launched investigations, peeling back layers of corruption that had been buried under the company's polished exterior for years. Fraud, embezzlement, the kind of revelations that could bring an empire crashing down. Inside his lavish estate, Jonathan paced across the marble floor, barking orders into his phone. "Fix this," he snapped. "I don't care how, just make it go away." But it was already too late. The fragile empire he had constructed was crumbling, and no threats or bribes could keep it from falling apart. By the time the police arrived, the Bryant estate was unsettlingly silent. Catherine sat in the living room, her manicured fingers drumming anxiously against a crystal glass of whiskey. As the officers stepped inside, she lifted her gaze, her expression filled with outrage. "You can't just storm in here," she hissed, rising abruptly from the couch. "Ma'am," one of the officers responded evenly. "We have a warrant." Behind them, Jonathan descended the sweeping staircase, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Do you even know who I am?" "Yes, Mr. Bryant," the officer replied, his tone unwavering. "And that's exactly why we're here." At the top of the stairs, Carlos appeared, gripping his phone tightly. "Dad, what's happening?" he called out, his voice trembling. Jonathan didn't respond. Instead, he turned his glare to the officers, his voice lowering to a menacing growl. "You'll regret this." But his threats had no effect. The officers read him his rights as they secured the handcuffs around his wrists. Catherine's outrage escalated into shrill protests, while Carlos remained rooted in place, his face drained of color. The once powerful family, feared and revered, now faced a humiliating downfall, their disgrace dominating every headline. Meanwhile, at Ethan's estate, the mood was quiet but contemplative. Emily sat at the kitchen counter, carefully arranging slices of fruit on a plate. Claire leaned casually against the counter, watching her with mild amusement. "You don't have to make it perfect, you know," Claire teased. Emily gave a small smile. "I just want it to look nice." Ethan entered, loosening his tie as he approached them. "What's all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the meticulously arranged fruit. "Breakfast," Emily said simply. Ethan's expression softened as he nodded. "It looks great." They settled in to eat, the television murmuring in the background with the latest updates on the Bryant scandal: embezzlement, police raids, frozen assets. Emily hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate, her expression unreadable. Claire reached over and rested a hand on hers. "Hey," she said gently. "It's over. They can't hurt you anymore." Emily slowly nodded, her grip on the fork tightening. "I know," she whispered. Ethan cleared his throat, drawing their focus. "You're safe here," he said firmly, locking eyes with Emily. "And I'll make sure it stays that way." For the first time in days, Emily's posture eased. She glanced at Claire, who offered an encouraging nod, then at Ethan, whose steady presence felt like a grounding force amid the chaos. "Thank you," Emily said softly, her voice steady despite the emotions flickering in her eyes. Ethan nodded, his usual composed demeanor softening. "You don't have to thank me. This is your home now." As they continued their breakfast, the house felt warmer, more alive than it had in a long time. Ethan observed the two girls, their bond unspoken yet unshakable, and felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The Bryant dynasty had crumbled, but here, within the safety of his home, something new was taking shape, built not on power, but on trust, care, and the hope of a better future. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Ethan's study, casting a golden glow across the room. The warmth in the air was a stark contrast to the heavy silence inside. Daniel sat across from Ethan, his calloused hands resting on his knees. His presence carried an air of quiet strength, though his eyes reflected both determination and sorrow. Breaking the silence, Daniel spoke, his voice steady yet edged with uncertainty. "I found a place here in Houston," he said. "It's nothing extravagant, but it's close enough for me to keep an eye on Emily. She's my family, Ethan. I have to do right by her." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And you believe taking her is what's best?" Daniel gave a firm nod. "She's been through enough. She deserves stability, a new beginning with someone who understands her past and can help her move forward." Ethan turned his gaze toward the window, watching Emily and Claire outside in the garden. Emily sat on the fountain's edge, her feet swinging as Claire animatedly gestured, her protective nature as evident as ever. "She's built a life here," Ethan finally said. "A bond with Claire. With me. It's not just about where she came from. It's about where she feels safe now." Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I know, and I'm not trying to take that from her. I'll make sure she understands she can always see you both. But she's my niece, Ethan. She's the only family I have left." When Daniel presented his idea to Emily, her reaction was immediate, a mixture of shock and hesitation. Her wide eyes darted between hope and fear. "You want me to live with you?" she asked in a quiet voice. Daniel knelt before her, gently taking her hands in his. "I do. I found a place nearby, so we can stay close to Ethan and Claire. You'd have your own room, and I'd be there for you every single day." Emily looked down, twisting the fabric of her dress between her fingers. "But I like it here. Claire is my family too." Daniel nodded, his voice soft. "I know she is, and I'd never take that away from you. This isn't about separating you. It's about giving you the family you've always deserved." Sitting nearby, Claire remained silent, her usual sharp wit subdued by the weight of the moment. 2 days later, on a quiet afternoon, the farewell arrived. Ethan, Claire, Emily, and Daniel gathered at the grand entryway of the mansion, the car waiting at the foot of the steps. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she clung to Claire. "I'll visit," she promised, her voice unsteady. Claire hugged her tightly, her own eyes wet, but refusing to let the tears fall. "You better," she said, her tone light but laced with emotion. "And if Daniel screws up, you call me, okay?" Emily let out a small laugh, nodding into Claire's shoulder. Ethan stepped forward, his usual stoic presence softened. He crouched slightly, resting a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You'll always have a place here, Emily. Don't forget that." Emily looked up, her eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. White, for everything." Ethan shook his head. "It's Ethan, and you don't need to thank me." Daniel placed a hand on Emily's back as he addressed Ethan and Claire. "We'll be back soon," he assured them. "She won't forget where she belongs." As the car pulled away, Claire stood on the steps, watching until it vanished from sight. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a silent show of support. "She'll be okay," Claire murmured, though her voice trembled slightly. Ethan looked down at her, his expression steady and filled with quiet resolve. "And so, will you? This is your home, Claire. It always will be." Claire turned to him, her usually guarded expression softened. "You mean that?" Ethan nodded. "I've already started the paperwork. You're not just staying here, you're staying for good." Claire's eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and relief washing over her. "You're adopting me?" "Yes," Ethan said simply. "If you'll have me." Claire blinked, her guard momentarily dropping. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Ethan reassured her, his voice calm. "Just know that this is your home, Claire. And I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long while, she let herself believe it. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms tightly around Ethan. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan placed a steady hand on her back, his gaze fixed on the horizon where Emily's car had vanished. At that moment, the once empty mansion no longer felt hollow. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was a home, built on trust, love, and the promise of a new beginning. Inside the cold walls of his prison cell, Jonathan Bryant sat hunched on the edge of a metal cot. The crisp, tailored suits he once wore had been replaced by the dull gray of a prison uniform. Above him, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, filling the silence that had become his only company. A newspaper lay on the small table in the corner, its headline a cruel reminder of the empire he had lost. Bryant Enterprises collapses amid scandal. Jonathan Bryant faces multiple charges. His fingers curled tightly around the edges of the paper, his hollow-eyed reflection staring back at him from the front page. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed, was gone. Bitter thoughts turned to Emily, the fragile girl who had never given him the admiration he craved. She had always been a loose thread in the tightly woven tapestry of his life. And yet, in the end, it was her existence and Ethan White's defiance that had led to his downfall. The paper slipped from his grasp, floating to the floor as his shoulders sagged under the weight of his ruin. For the first time, the echoes of his choices were deafening. Ethan's home stood in stark contrast to Jonathan's isolation. Sunlight spilled through the halls, filling the space with warmth and laughter as Daniel arrived with Emily for a weekend visit. The moment Emily spotted Claire at the top of the staircase, her face lit up. "Claire!" she squealed, dashing up the steps and throwing her arms around her. Claire laughed, ruffling Emily's hair. "Took you long enough to get here." Daniel followed behind, setting a duffel bag near the door with a smile. "Told her we'd be early, but she insisted on bringing something for the garden." Emily lifted a small pot of lavender, her cheeks glowing with excitement. "For the fountain," she explained. Ethan stepped from his study, his expression softening. "Lavender, huh? Good choice. Can we plan it now? Emily asked, her bright eyes darting between him and Claire. Of course, Ethan said. Claire, why don't you help her? Claire took Emily's hand, leading her outside. By the doorway, Ethan and Daniel watched as the two disappeared into the sunlight. She looks happy, Daniel noted quietly. She is, Ethan replied. She's healing. Daniel turned to him, gratitude clear in his eyes. Thank you, Ethan, for everything you've done, for her and for Claire. Ethan shook his head. No need to thank me. They've done just as much for me. That evening, the house brimmed with warmth as the family gathered.